It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Major Fred Galvin. Hi, Fred. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me, Doug.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I read through the press release that was sent to me by your PR people, and this story seems unbelievable. And rather than me read this thing, why don't you just tell me what happened? Before we start, though, let me just give a quick background. You were in the United States Marine Corps. You were Major. You were stationed in Afghanistan. What year was it that you were in Afghanistan?
There was two of our Afghan deployments that we described in the book, A Few Bad Men. The first was in 2007, and the other was in 2011.
Okay. And when did this story that you're telling in the book, which deployment did this happen?
So there's two, and they're both covered in the book. The most consequential was the 2007, and that's where it had the highest international publicity because it was we were falsely accused of war crimes of a mass murder. That was in 2007.
Okay, you want to just tell the story of that?
Absolutely. So many of the listeners understand you have the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. The Marines are considered an elite unit, and especially internally, every Marine feels that the greatest warrior on the planet is the United States Marine. That's indisputable by Marines. But to have some elite within an elite is a disgrace. That's an abomination in the Marine Corps. You can't have that. It's very hypocritical that we pride ourselves on being more disciplined and trained to a higher standard than Army soldiers. But the Marine Corps can't fathom that someone inside the Marines would be trained at a higher level. So we were the very first Marine Special Operations Task Force that was screened, selected, trained, and deployed into combat. We deployed to eastern Afghanistan, right on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So you think about that time in 2007, we were going into a general election for the presidency in the United States. At that same time, all our forces were being surged into Iraq. You may recall they had this full-length hit ad in the New York Times on General Petraeus. It said, "General betray us," because he was in charge of all the forces in Iraq. He requested there's over 100,000 Americans there. Very bloody, very unpopular. And then we go into Afghanistan, and right there on the Afghan-Pakistan border, we couldn't go into Pakistan, so they fully radicalized these foreign fighters, and they'd bring them through this border crossings checkpoint called Torkham Gate, and the very first village in there was controlled by the Taliban. So in your mind, think of the same akin to Amazon Fulfillment Center, this big distribution node where they'd link up with their handlers and they'd be pushed out all over Afghanistan to get their jihad on against the infidel. So as we entered this village, we saw nothing but fighting-age men lined up on both sides of the street. This was a totally different baseline change than 3 hours prior, where it was a normal pattern of life, hustle and bustle, men, women, children buying goods from the little local bazaar. But this time, 3 hours later, at 9 o'clock in the morning, broad daylight, we enter the village, this patrol, 30 of our Americans, and it looked like a parade. Fighting-age men lined up on the side of the street. As soon as we got into the middle of the town, a van filled with fuel and shrapnel designed to blast steel and set Americans on fire went off in the front of our patrol. We started getting first shot at on the left side of our road by jihadists. There's three hanging out of a sports utility vehicle firing their AK-47s, fully automatic, aimed right at the point of impact from that vehicle that detonated on our Humvee. So we quickly aimed and shot at that vehicle that was driving down this dirt road that was in the middle of nowhere. There's pictures of that all over the New York Times. It was all over the international media. Made quick work killing them. The driver of that vehicle bailed out of the vehicle into a ditch. He continued to fight against us, and he actually testified against us in the courtroom the following year. I'll get to that in a second. But then we got shot at from the other side of the road from waves of jihadists that were in formations in this dry riverbed. So one element was stationary. They'd provide suppressive fire while the other would advance towards us. Then they'd take up positions for suppressive fire, and they were bounding towards us. We were on this road looking down into this dry riverbed, and we made quick work of them as well. As we're trained in our doctrines directs in the Marine Corps, if we get ambushed, we conduct a counterattack. So we counterattacked and killed those jihadists. We were still receiving sniper fire at a pretty good clip from this mountaintop, and then the enemy dragged the vehicle across the road, swarmed at us. These were unarmed civilians, so we fired high above their heads, reported what had gone on, and then we departed the area, returned back to our base, and in 20 minutes, then the information warfare arm of the Taliban had already been launched 20 minutes after that ambush was initiated against us. What happened? Well, we were back on base. 20 minutes later, this is already on BBC radio, then they started mass rioting. The president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, rebuked us publicly, condemned our actions. Our generals buckled. They kicked us out of Afghanistan immediately. So we go back to the United States. Our Marines were interrogated using very illegal methods. I'll tease the book because some of these you just won't believe until you read what these men said under oath in a courtroom where the media was constantly kicked out during all defense witnesses. And when you read about, I'll give you a little teaser here, Marines who legally were naturalized, they legally immigrated, legally naturalized, legally joined the Marine Corps, and they had their families threatened to be deported by using this coercion, threatening, scaring them with illegal deportations of their family, and they signed. These were Marine Corps officers, lawyers, staff judge advocates dressed in civilian clothes. This is completely illegal to do. That fabricated these statements, forced these individuals to sign it. You read this in the book, your jaw will drop and your head will spin. And I recommend that you, please, I'm being serious, don't read it at night or after dinner, because you're going to have some difficult time digesting your food without getting an upset stomach. And it will very much disturb you. Read the reviews of A Few Bad Men on Amazon and see what people are saying about how disturbing. And this didn't happen in Tehran or Pyongyang. This happened in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, in a 3.5-week court. This is the longest courtroom trial in Marine Corps history. The largest number of alleged Afghan civilians killed by machine guns. And it all came out under testimony of exactly what happened. And you read this book about the former, he was the convening authority, Lieutenant General at the time, Jim Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, and how he unleashed 45 criminal investigators and 4 prosecuting attorneys to dogpile on the 7 of us. 7-to-1 odds. That type of unprecedented dogpiling that didn't happen in the Haditha case, Hondunia, or Fallujah cases, but they really did everything they could to try to lock us up. They had all of our sworn testimonies. They had my polygraph. And you read Appendix 3 in the back of the book. Please pay attention to reading those 79 statements of the Afghans. They're completely contradictory. They said that we dismounted from our Humvees, that we were drunk, that we used slingshots and hand grenades to make it appear that there was a roadside bomb, and that then we went door to door, these Afghans said, sport killing women and children. And our leaders knew that was false, but they wanted to believe it, and they wanted to lock up innocent Marines. When I say they knew it, you say, well, that's your opinion. Well, then why did they put me? As soon as I was on the patrol myself, they relieved me, sent us home, and they put me in charge of training of the entire Marine Special Operations Command. So I was in charge of training every commando in the entire task force. Why would they do that if they thought this maniac was on the patrol, he's being charged. They had sent 2 of us to the trial. I was one as a commanding officer. You read about this, and it's very unethical. This is the largest employer in the United States, Doug. I'm talking the Department of Defense, largest by far. If you stacked Amazon and Walmart, the next 2 and 3 on top of each other in head counts, until just recently, the Department of Defense still outnumbered them. But Amazon can't put you on bread and water, nor can Walmart sentence you to death, which the military can and does when people think that, come on.
Let me ask you something. Sorry, let me ask you something. I'm just digesting everything you just said because it's absolutely incredible. Why is my question that comes up? Why would the commanders of our military turn against their own men? For what reason? What political gain?
There's 2 good reasons. Yes, this virtue signaling. These commanders. Now, you had situations that occurred right before that, as you and your listeners probably do recall, the Corporal Patrick Tillman case, and then there was other cases that the Marines were involved in as well, in Fallujah, Haditha, and Khamenei. So the free passes and the outcomes of those was that the commanders didn't investigate completely enough and swiftly enough. So at that time, they're like, oh, if that's what is necessary, I'm going to dogpile. I'm going to pile it on and over-investigate and immediately come to my conclusion. So it led to this pendulum swinging the other way, where it's this rush to judgment, make a quick decision, kick us out of country. Now you got to justify why you did something like this. Is the first Marine unit ever kicked out of a war zone. Very embarrassing, all over the headlines. But you read chapter 26, and you see everybody that made those, the critics, the ones who are pointing the fingers, the Pharisees that condemned. You see these modern day zealots, how they were all promoted. Mattis got his 3rd star. The Army colonel who was a colonel at the time that condemned us made the public speech saying this was a terrible, terrible mistake. He retired as a 4-star as well. And it goes on and on. Mattis still working at the Cohen group. On the board of General Dynamics. They continue to be rewarded. So twofold, they knew that, hey, we're going to this hearts and minds, this kinder, gentler, this counterinsurgency strategy. Let's take an opportunity to have this forever war. And it's not to kill our way out of Afghanistan. They actually said, we're never going to kill our way out of Afghanistan. Well, that's how you win wars. We didn't sit down with the Japanese after Pearl Harbor and say, come on, what we'll do is we'll buy a bunch of your vehicles later on. Can you get a picture? No, we killed our way out of the war with the Empire of Japan.
Right. Well, it's absolutely amazing. And I did want to ask you, did you lose any of your men during that?
No, and thank God. Total throughout my career, 10 deployments, and never lost a single Marine. Unfortunately, that is never the case when you deploy. And as tactical units in special operations before that, we were this elite unit that was called Force Reconnaissance. And we did these commando raids, but we never lost anyone that on all those deployments that had been on. And that's divine providence more than it is tactics.
That's great. So let me fast forward this a little bit because we're kind of running down on time. So what was the outcome? What happened to you guys?
This is the biggest point in the book. This is where the Taliban I just described has information warfare. They launched all this stuff out in the media. The military did the same, but this is illegal. You can't do this against your own troops. You can't do this against the American people. So the outcome was that we had the longest trial in Marine Corps history, like I described, 3.5 weeks in the courtroom. The military jury heard everything during this war crimes trial. Who didn't hear? The media. Every time we had exculpatory evidence, anytime there was not just a defense witness, but I'm talking character witnesses, people who hadn't even been to Afghanistan and were just saying, Fred Galvin is a good guy. It was one-sided story. They'd moved the media completely, not just out of the courtroom and in the lobby, 2 buildings over and put them on the 2nd floor. This happened for 3.5 weeks. This is known in the military as information operations. Readers, look up the definition. It's when you distort the truth. Again, this is illegal. You cannot do it. When you read the book and you see everything that went on in that courtroom that I fought for 11 years to have declassified, when you read the sworn testimony of these witnesses, your head will spin. And this cannot happen again. Unfortunately, there's a separate case in the same command, the Marine Special Operations Command, that's currently in progress. The MARSOC 3, these men they're under fire right now, being accused of homicide for defending themselves on a case in Iraq. Whole nother story, but this situation happened 44 months ago, and these guys are being set up to take the fall again. On your free time, look up MARSOC, MARSOC 3. That's the current case in progress. 3 other commandos. They need American support and the support of our elected officials to put this ridiculous rush to judgment and unlawful command influence to rest in these cases by dismissing them.
Yeah, I will take a look at that. After all this is said and done, how do you feel about your service to your country at this point?
Mixed feelings. So it was the most intense, it was the most fulfilling I've ever felt, serving with people who are completely committed. And as I mentioned in the pre-show, we have to look to the future. I live in today and in the future, not what we did in the past. So what I did in the past professionally is very fulfilling. Today, I work for Tesla, and it's a company that is exploding with growth and new products, and that is the epitome of American innovation. So that's kind of what it does, get me out of bed in the morning, charging me into work and working a full, aggressive day. It's great Americans that you surround yourself, just like I did for almost 27 years in the Marine Corps.
I guess the last question is, how did you feel about the withdrawal from Afghanistan? We all saw that on the news.
Yes, that was an abomination. We needed to leave because it was just a forever war that these military-industrial complex firms were profiting from. It wasn't progressing in any positive direction. It's how we left. That has results, and that has led to not the coincidences of our adversaries just seeing us weak, which you see their actions going into Ukraine fighting. You see what North Korea has launched, and the press doesn't cover, over 31 ballistic missile launches this calendar year. You see what's happened off our Florida coast, 1,700 meters in the Caribbean Sea, hosted by Venezuela last month with this exercise Sniper Frontier, where they brought in China, Russia, and Iran to do military operations, a total of 13 countries in our front yard. So they're bringing the fight to us. It's not something we're going to wait and see in the Straits of Taiwan. We are going to, when we portray weakness, there is consequences of that, and we need to turn our military around. This right now is going to work against the United States as we've been dismantling. You look at the recruiting and retention rates of the United States military. People don't want to serve in an organization that they don't respect anymore. Most of this in the military, it's a family business. Somebody in their family served, and people are directing their younger loved ones not to go in that direction. It's very difficult for us to fill those ranks. So what do? They lower the standards, and that's definitely not what we want.
Well, aside from the debacle, then we lost 13 service members right on the way out, which was completely horrifying. And I think it could have been prevented. You know, I think had we had been better prepared and left in a more orderly fashion, those service members would still be alive. I believe that.
Yes, that's a whole other story. We didn't have to go out of our most defenseless airfield. In Department of State, they have a regional security officer that coordinates non-combatant evacuations with the Department of Defense when they need the Department of Defense. They always have redundancy in their plans, these emergency action plans. Marines do non-combatant evacuations operations all across the globe. We've done these many times. But you don't go down to a single point of failure and look at only the worst place as far as defense. I mean, everybody knows the obvious. Bagram was where we were at, and we should have had both of them open, but we go to a place that was the highest risk. And what happened over a year ago? Well, they've started loading up the Afghans first. That's completely against Department of State policy. You prioritize in a triage method, and you are obligated by law to evacuate the American citizens first. What did you see? You saw over 680 Afghans loaded up in a U.S. Air Force C-17, which were the first ones to fly out, in addition to those dangling to their death on the wheel of the C-17.
Disgusting.
That has consequences. And when Americans are left behind, the leaders of our adversaries' leaders know how weak and how ridiculous it is. And this is my opinion, I wouldn't be surprised that was the tail wagging the dog, the Pentagon's telling President Biden, we are in control of when wars start and end. Why did we leave $7 billion worth of war material there? Why did we leave Americans? This was unacceptable, and no one's been held accountable. You just see these generals, they all retire, like the last chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joe Dunford, Marine 4-star general, works for Lockheed Martin. He's not a pilot. Has no experience in missile systems. All of these gentlemen. Same with General Mattis. He's not into aviation systems. When he worked with Theranos on their board, he doesn't have degrees in microbiology. They're paid because they have access to the Pentagon, because they have relationships with members of the Senate and House Armed Services Committees. It's all about return on investment, and all those gentlemen will want a war and will profit from one when China pushes 96 miles across the Straits of Taiwan and lodges in Taiwan. And the only way we're going to get them out is a very expensive and bloody war that you can only dislodge by getting Americans onto an island by amphibious or airborne operations. So this is going to be very bloody, but it's going to profit those oligarchs that have positioned themselves. And America, we need to beware. We cannot be perceived as weak. We need to be able to deter aggression, but we can't have leaders that have lied to Congress. Read the book, and you just see all these generals who lied and lied and lied in their correspondence, official correspondence to Congress. That's called false official statement. That's a felony. And they did it, and then they got promoted, and they got rewarded. That's who's leading America's sons and daughters in uniform in the Pentagon, and who's now working on these boards. So I think a lot of people have lost a lot of trust in our military.
Fred, we do have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'm kind of at a loss for words as to what to say. Thank you very much for your service to our country. It's unfortunate that it turned out the way it did, but you seem to have your life together, yeah? And you're doing good things?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, very much. Thanks. And I just would like to let the listeners know, a lot of people hear a book, but this book can be listened to, and a lot of people don't want to sign up for Audible to listen to it, so it is also available on CD at Amazon, so they can get electronically on Kindle to read. They can read it hardback. They can listen to it on CD as well as on Audible, and they can all order it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, wherever books are sold.
Okay, great. Do you have a website you want to give out? Personal one or one for the book?
Yes, it's commandoshow.com. They can find more information about this book and this situation on that website.
SHOW.com?
Yes, Commando with a C, commandoshow.com.
Okay. All right, great. Word. We'll put it in the show notes. Thanks again for sharing your story, and best of luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you very much, Doug.